Imagine waking up to chains, to blood on your hands, and a monster watching you with dead eyes. Now imagine that monster is your only hope for survival. Would you fight back against an empire that built its glory on your suffering, or would you kneel and die forgotten? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't just another war story. It's the brutal truth about rebellion, about freedom, and the price no one ever tells you about. This is HFY Sci Fi Love and War Story. If you're ready to dive into a world where slaves and beasts rise against tyrants, make sure you smash the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment to join the uprising. Before we begin, answer this. If you had nothing left but rage, would you stand and fight, or let the world grind you into dust? Comment "We rise together" if you're one of the few who would choose to fight. Now, let's begin. Under the burning twin suns, the arena lay like a festering wound across the land, a monument to cruelty, a theater of blood. The crowd roared, a sea of hungry mouths and glittering teeth, waving their crude flags stitched together with the skins of those who had fallen before. Down below, in the pit of cracked stone and blood-soaked sand, the latest group of slaves stumbled forward, blinking against the harsh light. Each one wore the same broken expression, not fear. Fear was for those who still had the luxury of hope, but numbness, the dull acceptance of animals sent to slaughter. Among them moved Go. Just another number. Another warm body to be torn apart for entertainment. Yet there was something stubborn about the way he walked, as if even now, some foolish little flame refused to die inside him. Above them, the masters lounged on marble balconies, draped in silks and jewels pilfered from dying worlds. They were not rulers, they were parasites, bloated and soft, feeding off the misery of others and calling it civilization. At the signal, the arena's iron gates groaned open. From the darkness beyond, a figure lumbered into the light. The beast. They called him Bigfoot, as if mocking the ancient terrors of old Earth myths. But this was no simple legend. This was a creature built of nightmares and broken dreams, 8 feet tall, muscles rippling under matted fur, eyes black and hollow as forgotten graves. A low growl rumbled from his chest. The crowd went berserk, tossing bones and coins into the pit, shrieking bets and curses. Rip them apart. Make it messy. Bleed them slow. Because in this place, death wasn't the end. It was the entertainment. Go watch the beast approach, his heart hammering not from fear, that would have been understandable, but from a rising, irrational anger. Anger at the masters, at the crowd, at the whole damned system that had turned men and monsters alike into puppets dancing for their amusement. He should have run. Should have fought. Instead, he stood there, foolish and furious and, if anyone had asked him later, a little bit stupid. Bigfoot paused, sniffing the air. For a brief, broken heartbeat, their eyes locked. And in that moment, Go saw it. Not rage. Not bloodlust. But confusion. Loneliness. Pain so deep it made his own bruised soul flinch. Bigfoot was not a monster. He was a prisoner. Just like them. But the crowd didn't see that. They wanted a show. The wood cracked from above, and instinct slammed through the creature's body. Bigfoot roared, a sound that tore through the bones, and charged. Go dodged, barely, feeling the air tremble with the beast's passing. Around them, slaves scrambled, tripping over each other, crying out in terror. Some fought back, wildly swinging broken weapons. Others curled into balls, praying for a quick death. But Go laughed. A dry, cracked sound that startled even himself. Because somehow, in the middle of all this madness, he understood. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about surviving. It was about refusing to be the puppet they wanted. He grabbed a fallen spear and slammed it, not into Bigfoot, but into the ground between them. The creature skidded to a halt, confused. Go spread his arms wide, an absurd gesture in the face of death. Go ahead, he muttered under his breath. Kill me. Beat me. Turn me into another joke for their fat little gods. He spat blood onto the sand. But I won't dance for them. Bigfoot stared. somewhere, deep in whatever battered soul still lived inside him, something shifted. The crowd grew restless. Bets were shouted. Guards leaned forward, fingering their shock whips nervously. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Victory was supposed to be brutal. Death was supposed to be easy. Life was supposed to be cheap. Instead, they got two fools standing in the dust, staring at each other like idiots at a bad wedding. It was, frankly, terrible entertainment. Which, in a twisted way, made it the best act Go could have ever performed. Because if the one thing tyrants fear more than rebellion is boredom, then today, Go and his new, hairy co-star were about to become the worst show in town. And honestly, he'd always suspected he was too ugly for a beauty pageant anyway. The chains clinked like cruel laughter as Go was dragged forward, his wrists raw and bleeding. Above him, the arena's towers stretched like broken teeth into the gray sky, gnawing at the heavens. Below, the sand sucked at his boots, sticky with blood that had long since stopped being anyone's concern. He was the new toy. The next sacrificial lamb to be thrown into the pit for the crowd's hungers. And really, who could blame them? When your life consisted of rotting in silk sheets and stuffing your mouth with other people's misery, a good execution was probably the only thing left worth getting out of bed for. Go stumbled forward, trying not to fall, not because he feared pain, but because he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him crawl. In places like this, dignity was rarer than fresh water. And twice as dangerous. At the center of the arena, Bigfoot waited. The creature loomed, a mountain of muscle and rage, his shackles gleaming with fresh oil. He had been fed just enough to move, just enough to kill. Because hope, like food, was rationed carefully in the empire of chains. The horn sounded, a low, ugly note that seemed to vibrate right down into Go's bones. The crowd erupted, a living sea of noise. Betting. Shouting. Laughing. Warriors marched out under banners of conquest, kings signed treaties, and empires rose and fell. But deep down, humanity had never changed. We were still animals who liked to watch each other bleed, pretending it was art. Bigfoot lunged. Go dodged, barely, feeling the rush of air from a fist bigger than his entire chest. Memories flashed unbidden in Go's mind. His mother's cracked hands planting bitter roots. The broken toy sword he'd whittled as a boy, dreaming of heroes. Dreams. Lies. All crushed under the jackboot of reality. Another swipe, this time closer. Bigfoot was fast for his size, a brutal machine honed by endless suffering. And yet, there was hesitation. A flicker of confusion in those black eyes. Go seized it. Not with words, words were for fools and politicians. But with silence. With defiance. He didn't lift his fists. He didn't run. He stood his ground. The crowd howled in frustration. The masters barked orders. Guards clutched their whips, ready to intervene. But Bigfoot hesitated again, snarling low, confused by the script being broken. Go saw it then. The monster they had crafted was still a soul, somewhere buried under layers of fear and pain. And pain, Go knew, was a universal language, even monsters spoke it fluently. Bigfoot roared, pounding the sand in frustration. But he did not attack. Instead, he circled Go like a storm circling a stubborn mountain. Maybe he recognized the same thing Go did. That here, in this pit of screaming death, there was something even rarer than life. There was choice. A choice not to be what they wanted. A choice not to dance for their amusement. A choice to say no. The moment stretched, taut as a whipcord. In the stands, Lord Varick, a man who measured life in the weight of coin and the color of blood, leaned forward, his jeweled hand twitching. If Bigfoot refused to kill, the slave would be punished. If Go refused to die, the system would crack. Neither option was acceptable. Because in places like this, free will was a virus. And Go, bless his idiotic heart, had just sneezed all over their perfect little plague house. Bigfoot grunted low, a sound almost like a question. Go gave the only answer he could. He dropped to one knee, grabbed a handful of bloody sand, and smeared it across his own chest in an ancient gesture of brotherhood. Blood for blood. Pain for pain. Not master and slave, but equals in misery. The crowd went silent. Even the guards hesitated, uncertain. In that heartbeat of stillness, Go understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. War wasn't about good or evil. It was about men so terrified of their own emptiness, they would rather drown the world in blood than admit they were hollow. It was about creatures like Bigfoot, built, broken, rebuilt. And fools like himself, who kept standing up even when standing up only meant getting knocked down again. But most of all, war was about choices. And today, for the first time in too damn long, Go had made one. Of course, that didn't mean he wasn't still probably going to die horribly in the next 5 minutes. But at least he could die knowing he had been a pain in the ass right to the bitter end. Which, honestly, was the closest thing to a victory he'd ever expected to get in this lifetime. The dungeon stank of rust and fear. The walls sweated damp misery. Chains rattled somewhere beyond the gloom, a cruel lullaby for the damned. Go sat with his back against the cold stone, staring at the massive figure slumped across the cell. Bigfoot, though now, stripped of the stage lights and roaring crowds, he looked less like a monster and more like some exhausted god, broken and forgotten. The silence between them was thick, uncomfortable, a heavy weight neither could shift. Two prisoners. Two relics of lost causes. Above them, the masters feasted, laughed, planned new wars over golden plates. Below, in the muck, real creatures rotted. Go shifted, feeling the ache in his ribs. Another reminder that bravery and stupidity were often just different sides of the same coin. Bigfoot stirred, his massive shoulders rising and falling with ragged breaths. Scars crisscrossed his body, souvenirs from 1,000 battles he hadn't volunteered for. It was funny, Go thought bitterly, they called men like him rebels, monsters, criminals. Yet no one ever hung a collar around the necks of the real butchers. They just gave them fancier uniforms. You're not so different from us, you know, Go muttered into the darkness. Bigfoot's ear twitched, a small, involuntary movement, almost human. Go smiled grimly. Connection, however slight, was a dangerous thing here. Hope was a disease, highly contagious and almost always fatal. Still, he talked. Not because he expected answers, but because silence in a place like this was a kind of death worse than any spear or claw. He spoke of the world he barely remembered. Of forests that whispered secrets to the wind. Of rivers that laughed like mischievous children. Of a sky that once stretched wider than fear. He spoke of the way his sister used to steal bread from the market and claim the gods had dropped it from the sky because she smiled so nicely. He spoke of loss, the kind that gnawed at the edges of a man's soul until all that was left was a hollow, angry thing that could still bleed but had forgotten why it should care. Bigfoot said nothing. But slowly, over hours, or maybe days, time had no meaning in the dark, the tension eased. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when Go thought he saw something behind those heavy, bruised eyes. Recognition. Pain. A terrible yearning for something neither of them could name anymore. Trust? No. Trust was for fools with futures. But maybe respect. Or at least, mutual irritation. In the grand theater of survival, that was practically friendship. The guards who shoved food through the cell bars never looked directly at them. Superstition, perhaps. Or maybe just a dim realization that you shouldn't meet the gaze of those you were slowly strangling. The meals were pitiful. Gray lumps of something that might once have dreamed of being meat. Still, Go always made sure Bigfoot got the larger share. It wasn't kindness. Kindness was a luxury neither could afford. It was strategy. A big friend was better than a dead one. One night, after a particularly rancid meal, Go chuckled softly, a sound so alien in the dungeon that Bigfoot actually lifted his heavy head. Funny, isn't it? Go said, tossing a pebble against the far wall. We fight their wars. We kill their enemies. We entertain their sad little lives. And in return, they reward us with moldy bread and death." He snorted. "Honestly, if I'd known life was going to turn out like this, I would have just stayed a potato farmer." Bigfoot grunted, a deep, rumbling sound that, to Go's surprise, almost resembled a laugh. Or a death rattle. Hard to tell the difference in this place. The chain between them clinked softly as Bigfoot shifted closer. And somehow, in that terrible, broken moment, an alliance was born. Not forged in fire or oath, but in a simple, shared understanding. They were done being someone else's circus act. Done dying for laughs. Done living on their knees. The cell door rattled suddenly, a sharp reminder that their time was running out. Another day. Another fight. Another chance to bleed for an audience that cared less about survival and more about spectacle. Bigfoot rose, his massive form blocking the thin shaft of light from the hallway. Go followed, shaking out his battered limbs with a groan. Side by side, man and beast prepared to step once more into the bloody theater of despair. Neither spoke. Words were useless in a world where your value was measured in screams. But if Go had been forced to explain it later, he might have said something like, "We weren't friends. We weren't brothers. We were just two idiots standing too close together when the universe started throwing rocks." And honestly, judging by the size of Bigfoot's foot, he figured he was still the luckier idiot. The title of Centurion landed on Go's shoulders the same way a dead rat might fall into your soup, unwanted, suspicious, and probably diseased. The old Centurion, Lao Kai, had died the traditional way. Stabbed in the back, trampled by his own men, and then, somewhat redundantly, pushed headfirst into a dung pit. It was, Go reflected, a refreshingly honest form of democracy. Now the brass collar rested around Go's neck, heavy and cold. He stood before the battered slaves, men, women, children, all wearing the same expression. Hope. The most dangerous contagion of them all. The guards, leaning against cracked pillars, laughed and muttered bets on how long the new idiot would last. 1 week. Maybe 2 if he kissed enough boots. Go cleared his throat, wincing at the way the sound bounced weakly off the stone walls. He wasn't a leader. Hell, he barely qualified as a functional adult. But here he was, responsible for 200 broken souls, a suicidal beast, and the crushing knowledge that one wrong step meant public execution, with a side of audience participation. He raised his voice, forcing the words out like splinters. "No more sour bread," he barked. The crowd blinked. Someone snickered. Go pushed on. No more stealing from each other. No more kicking the sick for a scrap of moldy meat. Starting today, everyone eats. Everyone survives. Murmurs rose, skeptical and bitter. Promises were cheap. Hope was cheaper. Death was the only real currency. Still, he kept speaking, stringing together impossible dreams like a man selling umbrellas during a drought. We stand together. We fall together. We bleed together. Bigfoot loomed silently at his back, a massive, breathing threat that said more than any speech. The guards watched, amused. Let the new Centurion play king among the rats. Sooner or later, he'd drown like the rest. But Go knew something they didn't. People who had nothing left were terrifyingly easy to inspire. It wasn't courage. It was spite. A decision that if they were going to die, they might as well do it flipping the biggest, ugliest middle finger at the bastards holding the chains. The next morning, Go abolished the old ration system. Instead of letting the strong rob the weak, everyone would line up. Orderly. Fairly. It was, of course, an immediate disaster. Fistfights broke out. Old habits died hard, usually screaming and biting. Go waded into the chaos without hesitation, punching, dragging, shouting. At one point, a child bit his hand so hard he saw stars. He rewarded her with the biggest chunk of meat he could find. Lesson 1, brutality taught obedience. But generosity taught loyalty. It was a slow, ugly process, like teaching wolves to sit politely at the dinner table. But day after day, it worked. Bit by bloody bit. There were setbacks. Always. The guards grew nervous. The masters grew suspicious. And Go grew tired. Bone deep tired. The kind of tired that curled up inside your chest and whispered that maybe nothing ever changed, not really. At night, lying in the dark with nothing but the stink of unwashed bodies and old blood for company, he thought about home. About green fields that might have just been dreams. About laughter he wasn't sure had ever really been his. About the first time he learned what war really meant. Not banners, not honor, but a pit full of strangers killing each other for someone else's profit. And wasn't that the grand secret of civilization? Dress up the butcher's block in enough flags and anthems, and men would line up to slit each other's throats with pride. Still, he kept going. Because when you had nothing left to believe in, you fought for the person standing next to you. You fought so maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to bury another brother or sister tonight. Bigfoot remained his silent shadow, towering and terrifying. Sometimes Go caught the beast watching him with an almost human sadness. Other times, he caught Bigfoot trying to steal extra bread from the supply cart. Progress, he supposed, came in strange forms. By the end of the week, a miracle had happened. People queued without violence. Children laughed, thin and bright. Old men shared stories by the fire. And Go stood watching it all, wondering when the hammer would finally fall. Because it always did. And sure enough, one night, as the moons rose blood-red over the battered camp, a messenger arrived. Summoned to the high tower. A meeting with the masters. The guards smirked as they dragged him away, certain they'd be betting on how long he'd scream before sunrise. Go didn't resist. He simply squared his shoulders, flashed Bigfoot a grin that was more teeth than sense, and thought, well, if they plan to kill me, I hope they'd at least let me finish dinner first. Would be a real shame to die on an empty stomach. Again. The tower smelled of old stone, burnt meat, and the kind of rot that only comes from too much power sitting in one place for too long. Go knelt on the cold floor, the polished marble slick under his knees. Above him, perched like vultures on gilded thrones, the masters whispered and chuckled behind silk fans and wine-stained teeth. Lord Varric, swollen with too many feasts and too few regrets, leaned forward. You've stirred the ants, Centurion, he said, voice oily with amusement. They're marching. Neat little lines. Cute. The others laughed, the kind of laughter that smelled like graves. Go said nothing. There was no point arguing with termites about the house burning down. Instead, he listened. Listened as they explained, in smooth, careful words, that order was essential. That chaos was dangerous. That hope was a disease best amputated early. They didn't want loyalty. They wanted obedience. Blind, dumb, terrified obedience. In return, they promised the usual bribes. A few extra rations. A slightly bigger cell. The privilege of beating other slaves instead of being beaten. Freedom, after all, was a game of percentages here. And the house always won. Go looked up, meeting Varric's gaze without blinking. He smiled, a small, cracked thing. And politely, he told them to go to hell. The beating that followed was almost ceremonial. 2 guards, 6 boots, and a particularly enthusiastic application of the disciplinary baton. They broke 2 of his ribs. Maybe 3. Go lost count after the first scream. When they dragged him back to the camp, the slaves gathered around, silent and grim. Bigfoot hovered at the edge, rumbling low and dangerous. Go struggled to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth, and managed, somehow, to bark a single, ragged command. Line up. Everyone eats. And by some small miracle, they did. Because tyranny could beat a man bloody. It could chain his body. But it could never quite kill the stupid, stubborn spark that refused to kneel. Not completely. Not yet. The next few days blurred into a haze of pain and whispers. The guards cracked down harder, inventing new reasons to punish, to starve, to humiliate. Men vanished in the night, dragged screaming into shadowed halls. Women wept over empty bunks. Children learned, faster than they should have, how to stop asking questions. Freedom, it turned out, was less a bright, shining banner and more a slow, ugly knife fight in the dark. And every inch gained bled a mile of sorrow. Still, they held on. Go taught them how to steal without being seen. Bigfoot taught them how to fight without drawing blood. Together, they taught them how to survive without becoming monsters. Sometimes, in the brief moments between terror and exhaustion, Go thought about home. About a place where the only thing you had to fear was the weather or the price of grain. About the way his father used to say, "Son, never start a fight you don't plan to finish." Good advice. Pity the old man forgot to mention what to do when you got stuck in someone else's war instead. One night, huddled around a stolen fire, an old man asked Go if it was worth it. All this pain. All this death. All this fighting for a freedom that might never come. Go didn't answer immediately. He just stared into the flames, feeling the heat sear old wounds, and knew. Finally, he shrugged. Freedom, he said slowly, is like love or a good stew. You know it's real not because it's easy, but because it leaves scars. The old man laughed, a dry, broken sound. Scars, huh? Hope you like 'em, boy. Because looks like you're about to collect a damn army of them. And sure enough, the next day, the guards announced new rules. No fires. No gatherings. No food without permission. And, most ominously, no more leniency for agitators. The nooses were coming out. Literally. Go spent the day pretending not to notice the gallows being hammered together in the main square. Pretending not to notice the way the guards smiled too much and spoke too little. Pretending. Because sometimes, the lie was all you had left between yourself and despair. That night, he stood atop a broken crate, addressing the huddled masses. He told them to stand firm. To hold the line. To remember who they were, not animals, not slaves, but people. And maybe, just maybe, idiots brave enough to think they could claw back a piece of their souls. When he finished, there was silence. Then, Bigfoot, massive, terrifying Bigfoot, clapped his enormous hands together. Once. Twice. A slow, deliberate applause that echoed off the stone walls like gunshots. One by one, others joined in. Clapping. Laughing. Crying. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was madness. At that point, the difference hardly mattered. And as Go stumbled down from his crate, ribs aching, pride burning, he thought, not without a certain grim satisfaction. Well, at least when they hang me, I'll die knowing I finally started a slow clap. The night cracked open under a red sky, bleeding fire onto the broken stones of the camp. It began with a scream, not of fear, but of rage. One voice. Then 100. Then 1,000. The slaves rose as one, a tidal wave of battered bodies and broken chains, surging toward the towers that had loomed over them for too long. Bigfoot led the charge, a living battering ram, smashing through the main gates with a roar that seemed to shake the stars themselves. Go followed, limping, half blind with pain, half drunk on adrenaline. Freedom, it turned out, smelled a lot like burning wood and terrified guards soiling themselves. The masters, in all their velvet and gold, proved surprisingly easy to kill. Soft men died fast when steel found their bellies. Faster still when Bigfoot found their faces. It was not noble. It was not glorious. It was survival in its rawest, bloodiest form. Some slaves fell. Struck down by crossbows or crushed under falling rubble. Their screams were brief, swallowed quickly by the storm. Go stepped over the bodies without pausing. Regret was a luxury they couldn't afford now. Regret was for poets. Tonight belonged to madmen. He burst into the central hall, gasping, ribs grinding. Lord Varric stood at the end of the chamber, clutching a jeweled dagger like a child might cling to a favorite toy. "You," Varric spat, "you ruined everything." Go wiped blood from his eyes. "No," he said, voice raw. "You did." Then Bigfoot grabbed the nobleman by the ankles and used him to redecorate a nearby wall. Efficient. Artistic, even. If gouged eyeballs and broken teeth were your idea of tasteful interior design. The battle didn't last long. It never does when the slaves realize the guards bleed just as easily as they do. When it ended, the camp was smoking ruins. The towers toppled. The banners burned. The survivors, those few who hadn't run or died, gathered in the wreckage, looking lost. Because nobody ever tells you what to do after you win. The story always ends with the revolution, the charge, the victory cry. It doesn't tell you about the silence after. The aching emptiness where the hatred used to be. Go sat on the edge of a shattered fountain, staring up at the bloody moons. His body felt like a collection of bad decisions held together by stubbornness and spite. Bigfoot lumbered over, dropping a salvaged chicken leg into his lap. Cooked? Poisoned? Possibly both. Go took a bite anyway. Around them, the others lit fires, mended wounds, buried their dead. Small, fumbling steps toward something resembling a future. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was human. And somewhere, deep in the battered ruins of his chest, Go felt something dangerous stir. Hope. Real hope. Not the easy kind that came with banners and songs. The kind that tasted like ash and blood and sacrifice. The kind that meant something because it cost everything. He thought about home. About the old fields. About his father's laugh. About the life he had lost somewhere between a dream and a war. And maybe, just maybe, he thought, they could build something better here. Brick by bloody brick. Bigfoot grunted beside him, gnawing on a bone the size of Go's forearm. Go glanced sideways at the creature who had once been his enemy, his executioner, his brother-in-arms. "You know," he said, voice rough but amused, "if someone had told me a year ago I'd be eating half-cooked rat with a giant hairball after overthrowing a slave empire, I'd have said they were crazy." He paused, chewing thoughtfully. "Turns out," he added, wiping grease on his torn shirt, "they would have been the most optimistic bastard I ever met. And that's how a broken man and a forgotten beast shattered the chains that once bound them. But freedom isn't a fairy tale. It's bloody. It's ugly. It costs more than most are willing to pay. The real question is, after all the fighting, after all the sacrifice, can anyone ever really be free? I want to hear from you. Would you have dared to stand against the system, knowing it could crush you without a second thought? Or would you have survived quietly, waiting for a chance that might never come? Share your thoughts in the comments. Smash the like button if you believe freedom is worth bleeding for. Subscribe to HFY Sci Fi Love and War Stories so you don't miss the next brutal, beautiful fight for survival. And remember to drop the secret phrase, "We rise together," in the comments, so I know you're part of the rebellion. This is just the beginning. The war for freedom has many battles yet to come.